Welcome. Today we're beginning a conversation about people who didn't just exist within modern culture, they were its architects. And our subject is someone who used fabric not just as clothing, but, well, as a kind of cultural weapon.
We are, of course, talking about Dame Vivienne Westwood.
Exactly. It's really impossible to overstate her significance.
It is. When she passed away in 2022, she left behind a legacy that was still active, still challenging everything. I mean, it says a lot that Sky Arts ranked her the fourth most influential artist in Britain of the past 50 years.
That puts her completely outside the box of just fashion designer.
Oh, absolutely. It places her firmly in the realm of, as you said, cultural architecture.
And when we looked at the source material for this analysis, the goal was really to trace the full, improbable biography of this iconoclast. We want to go beyond the obvious punk association. How does a woman from a working class background who trained and actually worked as a primary school teacher pivot so dramatically to become the architect of punk, a pioneer of new romanticism, and a lifelong political protester?
Well, that tension is the thread, isn't it? The tension between the very ordinary life she started with and the radical icon she became. That's the story. We'll be focusing on a few core themes that really jump out from the sources.
Okay.
First, the powerful synchronization of her clothing with the music and politics of the time. Second, her research process, which was, almost obsessive. It's what allowed her to leap from anarchic punk to 18th century historicism.
Right.
And maybe most critically, that lifelong tension she had to manage between her radical social critique and the massive global luxury brand she ended up building.
So let's start at the very beginning, because that foundation is so deeply conventional. It's what makes the transformation so jarring.
It is. Vivienne Isabel Swire was born in 1941 in Hollingworth, Cheshire, and grew up in a village nearby called Tintwistle.
And this context is key, right? It grounds her firmly in the post-war British working class.
Absolutely. Her father had been a greengrocer. Around the time she was born, he was a storekeeper in an aircraft factory. Their life was really defined by the expectations of that era. Then in 1958, the family makes a big move south to Harrow in Greater London.
Looking for new opportunities, like so many people at the time.
Exactly. And it's just after this move that she makes her first sort of attempt at entering the formal art world, which, ironically, she abandons almost immediately because of those same working-class expectations.
She enrolled at Harrow Art School.
Yes, which is now part of the University of Westminster. She was there to study jewelry and silversmithing, but she dropped out after only one term.
One term. That's less than 3 months.
Barely any time at all. And the sources give us her direct quote on this decision, and it's a moment of immense self-limitation, really, driven by what she saw as social barriers.
What was the reason she gave?
She said, "I didn't know how a working-class girl like me could possibly make a living in the art world." She just looked at the whole system, the galleries, the establishment, and saw no path forward for herself.
So it wasn't the lack of talent or interest?
Not at all. It was a purely practical assessment of the financial and social realities for someone of her background at that time.
And that practical assessment pushed her toward a much more traditional, secure career.
Straight into it. She went to a teacher training college, completed her course, and became a primary school teacher. It was a stable, reliable, sensible life choice.
But that creative drive, it didn't just disappear.
No, it was always there, simmering. While she was teaching kids during the week, she was nurturing her creative side in the margins. She made her own jewelry and sold it at a stall on Portobello Road.
That's an early glimpse, isn't it? That entrepreneurial spirit she would rely on so much later. Finding a way to create and sell outside of that intimidating art world.
Precisely. And during this period of teaching and jewelry making, she married Derek Westwood, an apprentice at the Hoover factory, in 1962.
And there's that wonderful detail that she made her own wedding dress.
A perfect detail. Her first son, Benjamin Westwood, was born in 1963. He later went on to become a notable erotica photographer. So this was a life that was really rooted in a kind of suburban stability.
A life that was about to be completely dramatically disrupted.
Her marriage to Derek ended not long after she met Malcolm McLaren. And this meeting, it changed absolutely everything. It plunged her right into the world of counterculture.
They moved in together in Clapham.
And their son, Joseph Correa, who would later found the hugely successful lingerie brand Agent Provocateur, was born in 1967.
What is truly astonishing, though, is the sheer cognitive dissonance of her life at this point. She continued teaching.
She kept teaching until 1971.
Just think about that. For 4 years, she's a primary school teacher by day, educating young children, while at the same time raising 2 sons and collaborating with McLaren on these revolutionary clothing designs that were about to define an entire movement.
The sources are clear that she was creating clothes designed by McLaren while still teaching. It's an extraordinary level of compartmentalization. She was standing on the very edge of this aggressive cultural revolution, but still had to report to the classroom every Monday morning.
So the moment she leaves teaching in 1971, that's when the revolution begins in earnest. We move directly into the period that establishes her brand and really defines the whole punk aesthetic, all out of their shop at 430 Kings Road.
And that address, 430 Kings Road, it's not just a building, it's a conceptual timeline of her career. Westwood and McLaren used it as a dynamic, constantly evolving gallery for their changing political and artistic aims.
She saw punk as a messianic movement.
She did. She said they were testing if one could put a spoke in the system. Her designs just perfectly synchronized with the disillusioned youth of 1970s Britain. They were a direct reflection of the economic stagnation, the social frustration, the political anger.
Let's walk through the evolution of that shop, because it wasn't a gradual change. It was a series of radical, intentional rebrandings, each one signaling a complete conceptual shift.
The first iteration, opening in 1971, was called Let It Rock. And this was a deep dive into nostalgia as a form of rebellion.
Specifically, the 1950s teddy boy look.
Yes, the dress, the music, the decor. They were tapping into that post-war subculture that existed completely outside the conservative mainstream.
But that nostalgia, it only lasted for a year. By 1972, the name changes to Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die.
A clear homage to James Dean, and this is the crucial turning point where the political anti-establishment message starts to take physical form in the clothes themselves.
It moves beyond just clothing into something more like wearable art.
Exactly. This is the era of those politically charged, sleeveless t-shirts with uncompromising words printed on them, like pervy and rocky. They started actively distressing the garments, decorating them with safety pins, zippers, and in a truly radical touch chicken bones.
The point was to make the wearer look like a cultural outcast.
It was. As Viv Albertine, who worked in the shop, pointed out, the clothing was about showing imperfection, showing the raw construction. It was a literal commentary on the messiness of life and thought.
And then the next phase, 1974, was perhaps the most notorious and aggressive: sex.
The name alone was designed to be confrontational, utterly challenging in conservative 1970s London.
And the designs matched the name.
Oh, they did? Biographers all point out that the aesthetic was explicitly grounded in fetish and sadomasochism. We're talking about rubber skirts, garments with bondage restraints, and printing pornographic images directly onto t-shirts.
This was a deliberate artistic act,
aimed squarely at provoking the comfortable middle class, using extreme sexual imagery to challenge the prevailing morality of the time. The shop itself became a sort of intimidating destination.
This is where the fashion becomes truly inseparable from the revolution. The boutique transforms again in 1976, this time to seditionaries, clothes for heroes.
Right. And by this point, the archetypal punk staples that we all recognize today were being refined and, you could say, mass-marketed. They were giving the movement a uniform.
The shift here was fascinating, though.
It was. They kept the confrontational spirit, they kept challenging gender norms, but they started using different materials. Softer things like mohair or distressed muslins. This is the birth of those pieces that are now in the cultural lexicon.
The famous bondage trousers.
Covered with straps designed to literally restrict movement, a statement about societal control. You also had the unraveling loose-knit mohair jumpers and those long-sleeve tops with screen prints, sometimes with fastenings to give the unsettling effect of a straitjacket.
It's a visual expression of feeling trapped by society.
A literal one. And of course, this entire period is inseparable from music. McLaren was managing the Sex Pistols, and they became famous wearing these exact designs, from the ripped shirts of Sex to the restraints of seditionaries.
This wasn't just synergy, it was a deliberate feedback loop.
Completely. The band became the living, breathing advertisement for the clothes, and the clothes gave the band its immediate, recognizable political identity. It shaped the UK punk scene overnight. It was a total artistic product. Music, fashion, and anti-establishment politics all rolled into one.
Viv Albertine's perspective here is so important because she was an insider. What did she say about the intent behind the clothes?
She said that Westwood and McLaren used clothes to shock, irritate, and provoke a reaction, but also to inspire change. And crucially, she emphasized that by showing the imperfection, the construction of the piece, they were telling a generation of disillusioned kids that it was okay to not be perfect.
He gave them permission to embrace the raggedness of their own lives.
Exactly.
So the Sex Pistols dissolve. And punk, as a political force, starts to fade into just a commercial commodity. This brings us to a dramatic pivot in the early 1980s. Westwood didn't just ride the punk wave out.
No, she chose to abandon it. That's what defines her integrity as an artist. She became fundamentally disenchanted. She felt that most people adopting the style were completely uninterested in its political, anti-consumerist values.
It had become just a marketing opportunity.
For her, yes. So she shifted her focus drastically. She moved away from contemporary street rage and towards historical research.
Which is a remarkable intellectual leap, to go from anarchic safety pins and explicit T-shirts to studying 18th century fashion history. She became, as the V&A later described her, a meticulous researcher.
Her new inspiration became the radical fringes of the French Revolution. Specifically, she was influenced by the aesthetic of pirates and the incroyables and merveilleuses.
We should probably pause on the incroyables because they represent exactly the kind of historical provocation Westwood loved.
We should. These were the post-revolution nobles, the survivors of the terror who were pushing back against the new Republican simplicity.
And how do they use fashion to do that?
They created these extreme, highly theatrical looks, deliberately exaggerated, and often morbidly referencing the recent political violence. For example, wearing high collars that sometimes referenced the guillotine. Westwood saw that this was fashion being used as dark humor and social critique, and she immediately incorporated that theatricality into her new lines.
Her collaboration with McLaren produced her first collection shown to the media in 1981, marking the official end of her punk era, the Pirate Collection.
This collection was a huge breakthrough. It showed the eclectic nature of her future work. It combined elements of 18th and 19th century dress, traditional British history, and even African prints. Even the runway experience itself was experimental. They used both rap and ethnic music, a fusion that was really radical for its time.
And subsequent collaborations with McLaren followed, with these fascinating titles that show the shift. Savages, Buffalo Nostalgia of Mud, Punkature, Witches. She called this whole period from 81 to 85 the new romantic period.
And she didn't just influence high fashion. She immediately captured popular music again. She created the highly distinctive look for the band Adam and the Ants, cementing her position as the designer who could define the post-punk aesthetic.
This is where she starts to really play with structure on a global stage. We have the introduction of the mini crenny between 1985 and 1987.
Right, inspired by the ballet Petrushka. It was an abbreviated, almost playful version of the heavy, restrictive Victorian crinoline.
The mini crenny is maybe the purest example of her intellectual approach to design. It wasn't just a skirt.
No, it was a concept. It was described as combining two fundamentally conflicting ideals. On one hand, you have the crinoline, which represents the restriction and encumbrance of high society women in the Victorian era, this idea of being trapped.
And on the other hand?
On the other, she paired it with the miniskirt, which represented the sometimes superficial mythology of modern sexual liberation.
So by combining them, she created a garment that was simultaneously highly structured and deeply cheeky, a critique of both historical oppression and maybe a more shallow, modern freedom.
Exactly. It was a structural joke about freedom and restriction. And this look was incredibly influential. It inspired major established designers like Christian Lacroix and his puffball skirts. It showed that Westwood was now dictating terms not just on the street, but in the European fashion establishment.
This historicist approach continued through what she called the pagan years, from 88 to 91. And her heroes changed again.
They shifted from punks to the figures you'd see in society magazines, the Tatler girls. She started using clothing specifically to parody the upper class, twisting their established, often stuffy styles into something humorous and self-aware.
And this era also led to a really important material relationship, her collaboration with the Scottish Harris Tweed Authority, though it started with some friction.
A lot of friction. Her Autumn-Winter 87-58 Harris Tweed collection is widely credited with reviving the use of that fabric in high fashion. It provided a huge boost to the local industry in the Outer Hebrides.
So what was the source of the tension?
It was a branding conflict. For her brand, she adopted an orb logo, an orb that looked like the sovereign's orb but with a Saturn-like ring around it. This logo was visually very similar to the orb mark that the Harris Tweed Association was already using to certify their cloth.
So you had two brands using very similar iconography to signal authority and quality.
Yes, but despite that initial tension, the Harris Tweed Authority later confirmed they successfully collaborated. They acknowledged her deep connection to the cloth, and the relationship proved mutually beneficial in the long run. Her appreciation for traditional, meticulously crafted British materials became another of her signatures.
And we cap off the 1980s with one of her most memorable direct political provocations, the 1989 Tatler cover.
This was pure fashion theater as political satire. She appeared on the cover dressed completely as the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher.
And the unforgettable detail is that she was wearing a suit that had actually been ordered by Thatcher, but just hadn't been delivered yet.
She effectively scooped the Prime Minister's look and turned it into a gag, and the caption underneath became famous. "This woman was once a punk."
It perfectly encapsulated her entire journey, from underground revolutionary to a figure capable of satirizing the highest echelons of power using their own symbols. That cover is so significant, it's on The Guardian's list of the best ever UK magazine covers.
She proved she could wear the establishment's uniform and still completely subvert its meaning.
And that successful subversion of the establishment leads us directly into the next phase of her life, where she truly transitions into the fashion establishment, receiving official honors while somehow managing to keep that radical edge alive.
The defining moment of this tension happens in 1992. She's appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, the OBE. This is a formal acknowledgement from the British monarchy of her immense contribution to culture.
But having received the ultimate sign of establishment approval, she simply couldn't accept it conventionally.
No. She received the medal from Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace, wearing an appropriate skirt suit. But underneath that skirt, the sources confirm she wore nothing but sheer tights and a reinforced bikini top.
It was a planned visual statement.
Completely. She told interviewers afterward that she wanted to show off my outfit by twirling the skirt for the photographers in the palace courtyard, which resulted in the now infamous photograph.
And she later admitted she heard the picture had amused the Queen.
That is perhaps the single most punk act she committed after achieving mainstream success. It perfectly sums up her entire legacy. Simultaneous integration into the highest social order and total subversion of its expectations.
Her way of owning the moment, making sure the focus was on her provocation, not her conformity.
And this dual identity was only cemented further when she was later advanced to Dame Commander, the DBE, in 2006. She accepted the title, but she never stopped criticizing the monarchy or the state.
Following that famous tights incident, Westwood entered a new era of personal and artistic stability. It was in 1992 that she married her much younger partner, the Austrian designer Andreas Kronthaler,
a former fashion student of hers, and Kronthaler's influence was significant. He eventually convinced her to move in the year 2000 from her modest, longtime ex-council flat into a magnificent 1703 Queen Anne-style house in Clapham.
A symbolic move. From working-class public housing into a symbol of historical British luxury, where she also indulged her love for gardening.
And their partnership provided a stable platform as the brand became a global powerhouse, taking on major commissions that further integrated her designs into established cultural and corporate institutions.
For instance, in 1993, she designed many of the colorful suits for Duran Duran's wedding album tour,
cementing that connection to music that began all the way back with the Sex Pistols and Adam and the Ants. Her pieces were so central to that album's aesthetic that they featured prominently in 3 of their music videos, including Ordinary World and Come Undone.
She even managed to dress academia. In 2008, after King's College London won the right to award its own degrees, Westwood was commissioned to design 20 new academic gowns and hoods.
Think about that. A deeply traditional institution giving her, the architect of punk, the responsibility of designing their most formal wear. Her comment on it was telling. She said through her reworking of the traditional robe, she tried to link the past, the present, and the future.
Her work also extended into corporate wear, specifically for Virgin Atlantic.
Yes, she worked closely with Richard Branson to design their crew uniforms. They were driven by a shared passion for sustainability, which led them to use recycled polyester fabrics.
And the design of the female uniform was meticulous.
Very. She used strategically placed darts to accentuate curves and hips, bringing her signature tailoring, which she'd perfected over decades, right into the airline cabin.
But for the average person globally, the high watermark of her brand's cultural integration probably came in 2008, with the Sex and the City film.
Ah, yes. The iconic layered wedding dress worn by Carrie Bradshaw in the film. A dramatic, show-stopping gown. It was a gift sent directly from Westwood herself, and it instantly became one of the film's most recognizable features.
And the commercial frenzy that followed really confirms her ability to translate high fashion provocation into massive consumer demand.
A commercial version of the dress was put on Net-a-Porter, and it sold out in hours. The demand was so intense that even the shorter knee-length versions sold out immediately.
The expansion of her brand confirms that appetite. Vivienne Westwood Ltd. Established a massive global footprint. By 2015, they had 12 retail stores in the UK and 63 worldwide.
Including 18 stores dedicated entirely to her designs in South Korea alone.
And that expansion has only continued. The company website today lists 102 store locations across 17 countries. It just illustrates the sheer size of the commercial structure she maintained, even while she was constantly criticizing the very consumerism that supported it.
Which brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most compelling and contradictory part of her life. That dynamic tension between her radical, uncompromising political activism and the demands and ethics of running a global luxury brand.
It's an internal war she fought very publicly.
And she seemed to embrace the conflict. In 2007, she publicly spoke out against the drug of consumerism, which is a remarkable thing for a luxury designer to say. She gave that highly publicized advice that if you have the money, then buy something from me. Just don't buy too much.
That is the tightrope she walked. Running a business that thrives on desire while trying to undermine that desire itself. In 2013, she even said she would stop any further business expansion to focus on environmental and sustainability issues.
But the sources show that this dedication to activism often ran up against the realities of corporate finance and production. The first major public friction point on this came in 2011, and it involved her corporate tax arrangements.
Right. Her company agreed to pay HM Revenue and Customs £350,000 in tax, plus another £134,000 or so in interest for underestimating the value of her brand back in 2002.
And we should clarify the mechanism here, because this is where corporate structure really clashes with political ideology. It stemmed from the sale of her brand's trademarks to Lotimo, a company she controlled that was based in Luxembourg, a known tax haven.
She sold the rights for £840,000.
But HMRC successfully argued that the brand was actually worth £2 million at the time. So by selling the rights cheaply to her own offshore company, she minimized the declared asset value of the brand in the UK and therefore reduced the corporation tax she had to pay there.
A practice known as transfer pricing.
Exactly. And it was widely criticized because using offshore tax havens fundamentally contradicted the stated policy of the Green Party, which she had declared her support for.
And even though her company later said she restructured her tax arrangements, the initial setup caused a lot of controversy.
It did. And that controversy fed directly into criticisms from publications like Lux magazine in 2013, who accused her of using the green movement primarily as a marketing tool to sell more products.
They cited multiple specific points of criticism that seemed to directly contradict her buy less advice.
Yes. First, despite her anti-consumerist rhetoric, her company was producing 9 collections a year, which far exceeds the average designer's 2. That volume inherently drives consumerism.
What were the other major criticisms they raised?
They pointed to the use of harmful chemicals, PVC, polyester, rayon, viscose in some of her lines that were being made in China, which challenged her sustainability claims. And third, there were accusations about labor practices, specifically the reported use of unpaid interns working over 40 hours a week. It highlights that inherent tension of being a radical icon trying to operate within a flawed, established capitalist production chain.
Despite the contradictions in her business, though, her personal activism remained uncompromising and highly visible, often leading her to switch political allegiances based on specific issues.
Her political alignment shifted several times. She initially supported labor, but in 2007 she switched to the conservatives. This wasn't really an ideological shift on economics. It was driven by her concerns over civil liberties and human rights.
Likely stemming from post-9/11 anti-terrorism laws in the UK that she felt eroded fundamental freedoms.
I think so. Then, in 2015, she declared her support for the Green Party, donating a substantial £300,000 to their election campaign. Yet, even within the party she was funding, the tax issue just wouldn't go away.
She was excluded from the party's Youth Wing campaigning tour.
Precisely because of her prior corporate tax arrangements, she famously condemned that as a wasted opportunity, saying, "I wasn't pure enough for them." It just emphasizes the difficulty of achieving ideological purity while navigating massive commercial success.
And later, in 2017 and 2019, she publicly endorsed Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn.
She called him a beacon of hope and supported his manifesto for a fair distribution of wealth. She always placed her political ideals above any kind of party loyalty.
Beyond electoral politics, her activism covered broad civil rights and environmental causes.
Oh, absolutely. In 2008, she campaigned for the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. She dramatically cut off her hair in 2009 to highlight climate change dangers, using her own public image as a canvas.
And she actively engaged with fundamental legal principles. In 2005, she partnered with the civil rights group Liberty to launch those T-shirts.
The ones that said, "I'm not a terrorist, please don't arrest me." This was a direct defense of habeas corpus, the legal principle that prevents unlawful detention. She was turning a civil liberties defense into a commercial, widely accessible public protest.
She formalized her conceptual critique in 2007 with the Active Resistance to Propaganda Manifesto.
A major piece, dealing not just with fashion, but with art, the human predicament, and climate change. The core message was this powerful dichotomy about human potential. We have the choice to become more cultivated and therefore more human, or by muddling along as usual, we shall remain the destructive and self-destroying animal, the victim of our own cleverness.
That's not fashion advice.
Yeah.
That's a philosophical statement.
Which she even staged as a play in 2009. But perhaps her most sustained and visible political commitment of her later life was her unwavering support for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.
She called for his release consistently over many, many years.
And she seamlessly merged this political cause with her fashion platform. In 2012, she used her fashion shows to push for his release, sending models out wearing "I am Julian Assange" t-shirts. She visited him multiple times.
Her protest became highly visual and physical, almost performance art. In July 2020, she protested his possible extradition outside the Old Bailey by suspending herself in a giant birdcage.
That protest was pure theater. She called herself the canary in the coal mine, saying she was half poisoned by government corruption of law. It was a highly dramatic performance that perfectly married her political critique with her lifelong flair for the spectacular.
And her involvement culminated in 2022 when she and Andreas Kronthaler designed the outfits for Assange's wedding to Stella Morris in Belmarsh prison.
They made sure her fashion had the final political word, even in a high-security prison. Assange wore a kilt-based outfit, and the bride wore a dress with graffiti on it. The clothing itself was designed to represent freedom and resistance in an environment defined by confinement.
As we move into the final years of her life, we see this acceleration of recognition. It proved that her unique brand of anti-establishment luxury was now firmly cemented in the mainstream. She was awarded British Designer of the Year 3 times, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts.
Her cultural status was truly affirmed in 2012. She was selected by Sir Peter Blake to appear in the updated version of his famous Beatles Scrap Peppers album cover. Blake chose her to celebrate British cultural icons, placing her alongside figures like David Bowie and Paul McCartney.
She was also named one of the new Elizabethans to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee.
A group whose actions were deemed to have had a significant impact on the age. Even the Royal Mail acknowledged her. A tartan outfit she designed featured on a commemorative postage stamp in 2012.
On a personal level, that thread of rebellion and creativity ran deep through her family. We mentioned her sons, Ben Westwood, the photographer, and Joseph Corey, the agent provocateur founder.
And her granddaughter, Cora Corey, is an activist and model, continuing her political values and artistic interests.
She had settled into her Queen Anne house with Kronthaler, embracing gardening, a vegetarian diet, and she identified spiritually as a Taoist. But even her 80th birthday in 2021 wasn't a moment for quiet reflection. It was a final, urgent call to action.
She was commissioned to create a new video work for the huge Piccadilly Lights screen in central London. And in the 10-minute film, she performed a rewritten version of Without You from the musical My Fair Lady.
This was the deeply political use of a major public platform, a stark warning against societal indifference to environmental catastrophes. What was the central argument of this final manifesto?
She explicitly linked the arms trade and global conflict to climate change, presenting her plan to save the world. The argument was, capitalism is a war economy, plus war is the biggest polluter, therefore stop war, plus change economy to fair distribution of wealth at the same time, no man's land.
An assertion that you cannot solve environmental problems without fundamentally dismantling the existing economic structure.
That warning that capitalism itself is intrinsically a war economy was one of her final major public statements before her death in Clapham, London on December 29, 2022, at the age of 81.
The tributes that followed were immense, cutting across music, fashion, activism.
Clem Matlock of the Sex Pistols said it was a privilege to have rubbed shoulders with her at the birth of punk. Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders, who'd worked in the King's Road shop, declared the world is already a less interesting place. Paul McCartney, Boy George, Alexander McQueen, they all paid immediate tribute.
And the details of her private funeral, held in Tintwistle where she grew up, are incredibly striking. They link her journey right back to its humble start while still retaining her flair for luxury and history.
The church was decorated with 45 meters of McLeod Harris tweed tartan. It was a final, highly personal, and expensive nod to the traditional British fabric she helped revive and the historical aesthetic she adored. It brought her career full circle in a single, deeply symbolic fabric choice.
So, after tracing this entire trajectory, from primary school teacher to dame of the British Empire, what does her life story ultimately tell us?
I think in a final synthesis, her legacy is defined by her enduring ability to use fashion as a cultural weapon. She's constantly shifting from raw punk provocation to historical high fashion, but the underlying engine was always this belief that clothes could inspire change. She made the wearer accountable for the meaning of the garment.
The ultimate question her life presents revolves around that philosophy of active resistance. Despite all the acknowledged contradictions in her business, the tax structure, the 9 collections a year, the environmental critique paired with luxury goods, she continuously used one of the world's most commercial industries as her platform for radical anti-consumerist and environmental warnings.
Which forces you to consider a fundamental idea, that perhaps you can critique a system effectively only from within it. Was her extraordinary success in building a commercial empire the only way she could purchase the loudest, most visible megaphone possible for her deeply political anti-establishment message? It's a compelling thought to explore as you process her remarkable, defiant life.
Thanks for listening.